Hi, Senator Scott Jensen, family practice doctor in Watertown, Minnesota and Chaska. And it's September 12th, 2020 on a Saturday afternoon. And I thought I'd like to just bring you up to speed on a few of the things I'm trying to do. I'd like to call this video Conversations Around the Globe. Over the last couple of weeks, I've submitted an affidavit in a court case in Colorado that's basically challenging the idea that it's okay to discriminate in an adverse way against churches. In that affidavit I submitted, two key pieces were a lack of scientific basis for restricting and disparately treating churches, and that there are some effective treatments for COVID-19 in the United States, and that context is important. So I just want to briefly touch on those things. There's no reason to discriminate against churches. If we can let thousands of people demonstrate without masks and gather in small areas, we can certainly let churches come up with their own solution, because people who are running churches and going to church are not interested in doing adverse things to the population. And that's what that lawsuit is about in Colorado. But effective treatments, I would just want to comment that there's more and more interest in some of these steroid inhalers that we use. One interesting thing is when COVID-19 first came out, we thought that it was really going to go after people with emphysema, chronic bronchitis, asthma. But the fact of the matter is, it seems like diabetes, obesity, hypertension are more problematic. And the theory has been put forth that it may be because many people with, if you will, emphysema and asthma may already be on combination inhalers, whereby they're getting a medicine that helps open up the bronchial tubes, but they're also getting a steroid in that medicine. It's usually a combined medicine, and that steroid is oftentimes budesonide or some other type of steroid. And that may be helping protect people with asthma and emphysema. So I think that's interesting. I also found it interesting that Tamiflu or oseltamivir back in 2005 and 2006, when the avian influenza epidemic was so concerning, that was identified as shortening the course of disease. And that's actually what we've been seeing with COVID-19, is that remdesivir, first cousin of Tamiflu, is perhaps shortening the course, but not necessarily being a miracle cure. Also, context is important. I looked back and reread my notes from the bird influenza epidemic in 2005 and 2006, and it prompted me to recall when I was asked by the governor at that time what I thought about whether or not we should go into a huge ramp up of response to bird flu. And I said I thought we should keep an eye on things. And actually the bird flu epidemic never really came to Minnesota, if you will. And if you actually compare the notes, there were many things we learned from the bird flu. And there's an article by the American Family Physician where they talked about utilizing the avian influenza epidemic of 2005 and 2006 as a model for how we might respond in the future. And I found it interesting that in that situation, we found that pharyngeal swabs of the pharynx were better than nasal swabs. And we found that Tamiflu didn't cure it, but shortened the disease, much like we're looking at remdesivir today. And it also pointed out that in that time, about 10, 15 years ago, N95 masks could help prevent person-to-person transmission because of its ability to screen out or filter out particulate matter, smaller matter, but that surgical masks would only prevent large droplet transmission. So those things were being discussed then as well. Another conversation I had over the last couple of weeks is one with the Speaker of the House from South Dakota, Representative Stephen Hoggard. And I have found him to be a person who asks very good questions. And he has been querying the Department of Health in South Dakota. And he came back to me and said, it appears that the kind of advice that we've been getting regarding the completion of death certificates in light of COVID-19 is not something that's happened before. That's what he had learned from South Dakota. So he shared my concern that potentially we were getting advice about COVID-19 when this had never really happened before. I also thought it was interesting that Brown University epidemiologists had done some study, and they had found that out of 26,000 students that had tested positive for COVID-19, there were 0 hospitalizations. Also, last night someone sent me a clip where I see that in Pakistan, they have a little clip of me talking about death certificates, and that was being played into India. And next week, I've been invited to do a TV program in Australia. And I think I may have mentioned previously that I've done a radio interview with BBC. And I next week will also be participating in some other discussions in England. What I'm really wanting you to take away from this conversation today is we're having a conversation. This is not the time to, if you will, react to one another with vengeance. Let's remember the Stephen Covey book in the late 1980s, where the 7 Habits of Effective People pointed out that we should seek first to understand, then be understood. And when you look around, folks, look for that fear formula taking place. I've talked about that before. That's where we frighten people, then we exaggerate extremist point of views, then we accuse people, and then we repeat the whole thing over and over again. Then we go from there by fabricating news or taking factoids and blowing them out of proportion. Then we ostracize any opponents. If you will, we ridicule any remedies or possible solutions. We manipulate the messaging. Then we sort of promise a utopia if you come on board with our perspective, unite with us, join in with the groupthink. And then always lead late because you'll be less likely to be criticized. And then lastly, applaud yourself, run victory laps that you didn't necessarily earn. These are the things that are going on. These are the reasons why we all need to stay engaged. We're moving through this COVID-19 pandemic. We're seeing more and more new cases. We're seeing case fatality rate predictions dropping. These are good pieces of news, but it's not going to stop sensationalistic media coming out and telling us, yes, this may be happening today. Yes, this may be looking good, but tomorrow could be worse. We're hearing a lot of that gloom and doom. Folks, we're all living under a cloud of melancholy. We need to resist that. As humans, we feel that. As citizens, we feel controlled. As a legislator, I'm wary of what's going on in the arena of power. As, if you will, a physician, I'm apprehensive what's happening to my patients. Let's remember one thing about power. Power corrupts. Absolute power corrupts absolutely. People in power know the power in statistics and massaging the numbers. And the only way around that is for all of us to stay engaged. Thank you. Have a good week.